In the quiet folds of a distant valley, where morning mist clings to the fields and the wind carries the scent of earth and pine, there lived a boy named Aaron. His world was simple, nestled in a village where the days moved slowly and the nights sang with the lullabies of crickets and distant owls. Life here wasn't easy. It was carved out of sweat, soil, and sacrifice, but it was home. Aaron was the eldest of 3 children, born into a family that had known more than its share of hardship. His father, a carpenter with hands rough from labor but a heart gentle and wise, had died in a tragic accident when Aaron was just 6 years old. Since that moment, the weight of responsibility began to shift, subtly at first, then heavily and completely, onto Aaron's shoulders. His mother, Elena, was a woman of quiet strength. Her eyes always seemed to carry a reflection of storms long weathered. She was the kind of person who stitched hope into old clothes and turned simple rice and vegetables into meals that fed more than just the body. She was love in its most tangible form, caring, tired, determined. With every breath, she worked to keep her children clothed, fed, and most importantly, grounded in the values she held dear: honesty, kindness, and resilience. Every morning, long before the village stirred, Aaron would wake. He'd hear the roosters crowing faintly in the distance, feel the chill of dawn clinging to his skin, and rise quietly so as not to wake his siblings, Caleb, a wide-eyed boy of 7, and Mia, barely 5. Aaron's first duty was to tend to their small vegetable patch. The soil was hard and dry, but it responded to care just like people. He watered the plants, pulled the weeds, and whispered to the leaves, as if encouraging them to keep growing. His mother once said that plants, like people, thrived on tenderness. When his chores were done, he'd rush back inside to help his mother prepare breakfast. They often had little more than porridge or leftover rice, but Aaron never complained. He knew the value of every grain. Despite the poverty, their home was not empty. It was full of warmth, of laughter that danced around the cracks in the walls, of hugs exchanged freely, of lullabies sung off-key but with meaning. They had each other, and sometimes that was enough. But then life dealt another cruel hand. Elena began to grow weak. At first it was just tiredness. She would lie down more often, rest her head in her hands, and sigh. Then came the coughing, the fever, the days when she could no longer get out of bed. The local clinic offered little hope. They lacked the equipment, the medicine, the time. Aaron watched it all unfold with helpless eyes. He cooked. He cleaned. He soothed Mia when she cried for their mother and kept Caleb distracted with made-up stories about magical forests and brave young boys who saved the world. But inside, Aaron was scared. He was just a boy. One evening, as the last light of the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting their modest home in hues of amber and blue, Elena called Aaron to her bedside. Her voice was barely a whisper, like wind passing through dry leaves. "Aaron," she said, reaching out to him with a trembling hand. He knelt beside her, clutching her fingers tightly. "Yes, Mama. You must promise me something." Her eyes, though tired, were still the same, deep and filled with unwavering love. "Anything. You must take care of them," she said, her voice cracking. "Caleb and Mia, they need you now more than ever. Promise me, my son, that you will never give up on them or yourself. No matter how hard the road becomes." Aaron felt the tears build behind his eyes, burning like fire. He nodded, lips trembling. "I promise, Mama, I won't let you down." She smiled, a small, soft curve that barely reached her cheeks, but it held the weight of her love. "I know you won't. You are stronger than you believe, and you must always remember I love you." That was the last night Aaron would hear her voice. Elena passed away 2 days later, wrapped in the quiet stillness of the early morning. The village mourned, offering what little support they could. But when the final condolences were said and the final meals delivered, Aaron found himself standing alone at the edge of a road he did not choose. He was 12 years old. He had no map, no guide, only a promise. And that was where Aaron's real story began, not with tragedy, but with a vow made in the sacred space between a son and his dying mother. A vow that would stretch across years, hardships, and hope. Because sometimes the most powerful beginnings come not from victory, but from loss. The days after Elena's passing blurred into one another, marked by a dull ache in the chest and the hollow quiet that settled over their modest home. Aaron stood at the center of it all, no longer just a boy, but a guardian, a cook, a cleaner, and a provider. Each sunrise demanded more from him than the last, but he never faltered. He couldn't. He had made a promise. Caleb and Mia didn't fully understand. They would wake and ask when Mama was coming back, and Aaron would sit with them quietly, arms around their shoulders, eyes staring into a future he couldn't yet see. Sometimes he made up stories about Alina being in a magical land where pain didn't exist, where she watched over them with a smile. He didn't know if they believed him. He didn't know if he believed himself. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been. What few coins remained after Alina's funeral were barely enough for a week's worth of food. Aaron didn't panic, he planned. He asked neighbors for small jobs. He offered to sweep yards, carry water, tend to gardens. Some paid with coins, others with food. Every crumb was precious. Every coin counted. But not everyone was kind. There were those who looked down on him, who scoffed at the idea of a boy handling adult responsibilities. Some doors were shut in his face. Some chores were given with mockery. Still, Aaron bowed his head, did the work, and moved on. Pride had no place in survival. The house, once filled with Alina's gentle touch, became a battleground of schedules and sacrifice. Aaron learned to wake earlier and sleep later. He washed the clothes in cold water, cooked basic meals, and taught Caleb and Mia to do small things like tidying up or folding laundry. He turned the home into a rhythm of routine and structure, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only way to keep everything from collapsing. At night, after both his siblings were asleep, Aaron would sit by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. The silence was thick. He would open one of the old books his mother had kept, and he would read. He didn't read for pleasure. He read for survival. He needed to learn. He needed to grow, and he needed to prepare for something better than this. One of those books was A Beginner's Guide to English. His mother had once hoped to teach him the language herself. She believed it would open doors, lead him to places beyond the valley, beyond the village, beyond struggle. Now alone, Aaron traced the letters slowly with his finger, whispering the sounds under his breath. Each word was a stone laid on the path to a future he couldn't yet imagine. The days grew colder. Winter brought with it more than just chill, it brought hunger and exhaustion. Firewood was scarce, clothes were thin. Aaron layered himself in blankets at night and gave Caleb and Mia the thickest clothes he could find. He watched their faces while they slept, small and peaceful, and reminded himself why he couldn't afford to break down. One evening, after a particularly long day of work in the fields, Aaron returned home to find Caleb crying. His schoolmates had teased him for wearing patched clothes and bringing no lunch. Mia sat beside him, confused and upset. Aaron knelt down, pulled both of them into his arms, and said, "We don't have much, but we have each other, and I promise you that's more than enough to get through anything." They didn't respond, but their arms tightened around him. Aaron began taking on more work, walking longer distances, cleaning more homes. His hands became calloused. His back ached, but he refused to show weakness. He had become the anchor in a storm he never saw coming. Eventually, a kind-hearted woman named Mrs. Adler noticed him. She was one of the few villagers who didn't just offer work, but also offered guidance. She began setting aside warm meals for him to take home, and on some nights she sat him down and helped him practice his English. Her encouragement was gentle but firm. "You're smart, Aaron," she'd say. "Smarter than you think, don't ever forget that." Her support lit a small spark in Aaron's chest. Maybe, just maybe, he could be more than a caretaker. Maybe he could build a life, not just survive one. He kept learning. He kept reading. He wrote letters he never sent, letters to his mother telling her about his days, his fears, his victories. It was his way of keeping her with him, even as her face faded from memory. As months turned into years, Aaron's world began to shift. Caleb grew taller and more confident. Mia learned to read and became curious about everything. Their eyes no longer carried the same sadness. They looked forward, not back. And Aaron began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his promise was more than a survival instinct. It was a seed that was starting to grow. Still, life wasn't easy. There were days when the money barely stretched, when Aaron skipped meals so his siblings wouldn't have to. There were nights when he cried silently, curled on the cold floor, overwhelmed by exhaustion. But he never cried in front of them. He wouldn't allow it. He had to be their strength. He continued practicing English, sometimes by repeating phrases over and over while doing chores. He read every book he could find, no matter how old or torn. Every lesson was a step closer to the life he envisioned. He didn't know what that life looked like yet, but he knew it was far from here. Aaron began keeping a notebook. On its first page, he wrote, "I will never give up, I promised her." It was more than a sentence. It was his anchor, his truth. The village around him remained unchanged. The same hills, the same fields, but Aaron was changing. Slowly, through each hardship, he was building something no one could see yet, a future rooted in sacrifice and watered by love. One night, sitting under the stars, Aaron whispered aloud, "One day I'll leave this place. But I'll never forget what it taught me." He didn't realize then that this dream, barely spoken and still fragile, had just begun to unfold. Spring returned to the valley with its usual quiet promise, wildflowers emerging between cracks in the stone paths, the river running louder after months of snowmelt. But for Aaron, this season marked more than a change in weather. It signaled the beginning of something long awaited, the first tremble of movement beyond the village boundaries. He had grown taller, leaner, his once boyish features sharpened by time and toil. His hands were rough, his clothes plain, but his eyes carried a quiet fire that hadn't dimmed. Caleb was now 12, old enough to understand the burden Aaron had carried for years. He began helping more, offering to do chores and even taking small jobs himself. Mia, ever bright and observant, had blossomed into a gentle, curious girl who adored books and dreamed of being a teacher. Aaron smiled when she said that. It reminded him of their mother. One morning, while returning from a long day of working in the fields, Aaron heard something unusual near the village square. A large, polished truck was parked near the community hall, and beside it stood a man in a crisp shirt and pressed trousers, speaking with the village chief. Word spread quickly. The man was from the city, recruiting laborers for a new factory being built on the outskirts of town. Aaron approached cautiously. He didn't speak at first, just listened. The man, Mr. Beck, explained they needed disciplined, hardworking individuals. The pay was modest but steady. Housing would be provided. The conditions sounded daunting, but to Aaron, it felt like a crack in the wall he'd been pushing against his entire life. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with his notebook, staring at the first sentence again, "I will never give up." The words reminded him why he couldn't say no to this opportunity. At dawn, he stood outside the community hall with a small satchel and a folded paper that held his few belongings. Mr. Beck glanced at him, eyebrows raised. "You're young," he said. Aaron looked him straight in the eye. "But I've worked harder than most grown men." Something in his tone must have convinced Mr. Beck. He nodded once. "All right, you're coming." The ride to the city was both terrifying and exhilarating. Aaron had never traveled beyond the hills that guarded his village. Everything looked sharper, faster, louder. The buildings reached toward the clouds, people moved with purpose, and the air smelled of industry and ambition. The factory was as promised, demanding, mechanical, alive with sound. Aaron learned quickly. He kept his head down, worked hard, and observed. The other workers, at first skeptical of the boy from the village, began to respect him. He never complained. He stayed late, he asked questions, and he remembered every instruction. At night, instead of resting, he studied. He found an old bookstore run by a retired teacher who took a liking to him. The man, Mr. Langford, offered Aaron used books and even allowed him to sit in the back room and read for hours. Aaron devoured them, books on grammar, speech, writing, and self-development. Mr. Langford noticed the fire in him and began coaching him in spoken English, insisting on clarity, enunciation, confidence. One day, while Aaron was organizing boxes at the bookstore, a soft voice broke his concentration. "You're the boy who reads like the world is about to end." Aaron turned. A girl stood there, no older than him, with curious eyes and a gentle smile. "I'm Claire," she said, extending a hand. He blinked, surprised, and took it. "Aaron." Claire was unlike anyone he had met. She volunteered at the local library, wrote short stories in her free time, and had a laugh that could soften even the hardest day. They began talking, slowly at first, then often. She asked him about his past, his dreams, his fears. Aaron hesitated, but her presence had a way of unraveling his guard. He told her everything about Alina, about Caleb and Mia, about the promise. Claire didn't cry or look at him with pity. She said simply, "You're the strongest person I know." They started spending more time together, walking in the park, sitting by the river that wound through the city, sharing stories. Aaron began smiling more, laughing. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel joy without guilt. Back in the village, Caleb was now handling more. Aaron sent money every month without fail, ensuring they had food, school supplies, and everything they needed. He also wrote letters, long ones filled with encouragement, lessons, and hope. Mia kept them all in a box by her bed. They called it Aaron's chest of light. Claire met Caleb and Mia during a visit to the village. They welcomed her with open arms, and by the end of the trip, Claire felt like family. Mia braided her hair. Caleb showed her where Aaron used to plant vegetables. That evening, under a sky full of stars, Aaron and Claire sat on the porch of the house he had grown up in. "I think I love you," Claire said quietly. Aaron's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't speak right away. He turned to her, eyes soft. "I never thought I'd feel this again, but I do. I love you too." They returned to the city with a renewed sense of purpose. Aaron worked harder than ever, and with Claire by his side, the dream began to take form. He applied for a promotion and began attending night classes to improve his qualifications. He enrolled in a certification program that focused on communication and leadership. The factory recognized his potential. He was promoted to team supervisor, responsible for a small crew of new recruits. For the first time, Aaron had a steady income, respect, and a place in the world that he had carved out with his bare hands. He found a small apartment, modest but full of light, and invited Caleb and Mia to live with him. Claire helped decorate it, soft curtains, bookshelves, warm blankets. Their new home was filled with laughter again. Aaron cooked dinner every evening. Mia would sit at the table doing her homework, while Caleb asked endless questions about science and the world beyond. Claire would hum while washing dishes, smiling at Aaron from across the room. One night, Caleb stood and raised his glass of orange juice. "To Aaron," he said proudly, "our brother, our hero." Aaron's throat tightened, he couldn't speak. He just pulled them all into a hug, the promise he made years ago echoing in his heart. He had kept it, and somehow it had brought him more than he ever imagined. The city no longer felt like a towering maze of concrete and noise. It felt like home. Aaron had not only adapted but flourished. His presence at the factory was respected, and his leadership had turned a previously disjointed crew into a cohesive, productive team. His English had become confident and fluent, his communication skills sharp and persuasive. For someone who once whispered new words in the dark by lamplight, Aaron had come far. Claire, now a school counselor, remained his closest ally and greatest support. Their lives moved in harmony, calm but purposeful. Their apartment was more than a shelter, it was a sanctuary. With Caleb and Mia thriving in school and growing more independent each day, Aaron found himself breathing easier, daring to imagine a future that extended beyond survival. He started saving not just for daily needs but for long-term goals. With Claire's encouragement, he took courses in business administration. At night, the apartment echoed with the scratch of pens on paper and the tapping of laptop keys. He was preparing not just for a job but for a life that could support others, a life with impact. Mia's 15th birthday was celebrated with a small party in the city park. She wore a blue dress Claire had picked out, and when she opened Aaron's gift, a set of novels in English, she burst into tears. "You never let me fall behind," she whispered, hugging him tightly. Caleb, now 17, had announced that he wanted to become a doctor. He was inspired by a volunteer medical team that had once visited their village. Aaron didn't blink. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. No hesitation, no fear. Aaron took extra shifts. He started tutoring English in the evenings. Every bit of money went into Caleb's education fund. He tracked every cent, skipped personal luxuries, and tightened the budget. Claire quietly supported him, sometimes leaving little notes in his bag. "One day, you'll look back and realize this was when you were becoming unstoppable." But life, as always, tests the strongest foundations. The factory where Aaron had worked for years announced it would be closing. Automation and budget cuts were cited. For most, it was just a business decision. For Aaron, it felt like the floor beneath his feet had been pulled away. He came home that evening with a blank stare. Claire knew something was wrong before he spoke. When he told her, she simply took his hand. "We've been through worse," she said. "You're not alone." Still, Aaron felt the weight return, heavier than before. Not for himself, but for the dreams now endangered. Caleb's medical school applications, Mia's growing curiosity about college, the rent, the food, all rested on his shoulders again. He applied for job after job. He revised his resume, wrote cover letters late into the night, and practiced interview questions in the mirror. Rejections came, some politely worded, others brutally silent. Each no was a small bruise. He never showed his frustration to Caleb or Mia. To them, he was still the steady rock. Claire, however, saw the cracks forming behind his quiet eyes. To cope, Aaron doubled down on learning. He enrolled in free online courses, public speaking, digital communication, project management. He reached out to former colleagues, asked for references, and sent messages to companies he admired. He refused to sink into despair. Then one evening, while scrolling through a job board, a listing caught his eye. A large logistics firm in the city was looking for a team manager with strong communication skills, leadership experience, and a background in operations. Aaron stared at it for a long time. He fit the profile. He applied. 2 days later, he received a call. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday. Aaron prepared relentlessly. Claire helped him practice interview answers, corrected his posture, and adjusted the knot on his tie. "Speak your truth," she told him. "Your story is your strength." He walked into the company's glass-paneled building with a deep breath and a quiet prayer. The panel interview was formal but not unfriendly. They asked about his leadership style, his problem-solving approach, his biggest challenges. He told them the truth about the village, about raising 2 children alone, about managing a team through sheer necessity and instinct. He didn't embellish, he didn't play the victim. He spoke as someone who had learned the world not from textbooks, but from the ground up. When it ended, he felt drained but proud. He had shown them who he truly was. 3 days later, the call came. He got the job, not just any job, a significant promotion with a salary that doubled what he had earned at the factory, benefits, and a team of professionals who would report to him. It was a leap, not just a step. Claire cried, Mia screamed and hugged him. Caleb just stood quietly, tears running down his face. "You did it," he said. "You made it all real." Aaron smiled, though his throat was tight. "No, we did." With the new job came new possibilities. Caleb was accepted into a medical university. Mia received a scholarship to a prestigious high school focused on language and the arts. Aaron bought a modest house, not grand but with space, light, and the sound of peace in its walls. He even began mentoring young professionals at his company, those from difficult backgrounds, those who doubted themselves, those who needed someone to believe in them first. And in all of it, he never once forgot the promise. Every decision, every sacrifice, every triumph was still tied to a voice he hadn't heard in years, a mother whispering her final request into the ears of a 12-year-old boy. He was keeping his word, and in doing so, he was becoming more than anyone ever thought he could be. The new home was modest but full of life. The living room, painted in calming shades of sage and cream, held shelves of books, plants that flourished by the window, and photographs, moments captured of a journey that had been anything but easy. Aaron stood by the doorway some evenings, just observing. Caleb's medical textbooks sprawled across the table, Mia practicing her presentation for a school debate, Claire preparing tea in the kitchen. The silence between their laughter felt sacred. It was the sound of a promise fulfilled. Caleb excelled in university. He was drawn to family medicine, inspired by the memory of their village clinic and the faces of people who had once been turned away due to lack of resources. Aaron supported him not just financially but emotionally. He reviewed Caleb's essays, tested him before exams, and stayed up late to make sure he never felt alone in the pressure. Mia, too, was becoming someone extraordinary. She had grown into a young woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper sense of empathy. Her interest in teaching was no passing phase. She began volunteering at community centers, tutoring children from underprivileged backgrounds. Every child reminded her of herself, of what could be unlocked with love, structure, and belief. Aaron, meanwhile, flourished in his role. He was no longer just a worker. He was a mentor, a strategist, a leader. People listened when he spoke. New employees sought his guidance. Executives noticed not just his competence, but his story. There was something magnetic about the quiet, grounded authority he carried, built not from degrees, but from endurance. One winter, during a company leadership retreat, Aaron gave a keynote speech. He stood before a room full of professionals in suits and spoke, not about metrics or policies, but about life, his life. He shared the story of Alina, of Caleb and Mia, of promises made in whispers and fulfilled in silence. When he finished, the room was still. Then, one by one, people stood and applauded, not out of politeness, but out of reverence. That night, a young intern approached him with trembling hands and watery eyes. "I thought I didn't belong here," she said, but now I know I do because you did. That moment stayed with Aaron for months. It reminded him that stories, like seeds, could bloom far beyond where they were planted. Later that year, Claire and Aaron married in a small ceremony surrounded by the people who had been part of their journey. Caleb stood beside Aaron as best man. Mia gave a speech that made everyone cry. They settled into a rhythm of partnership that felt less like new love and more like a deeply rooted trust. They talked about starting a family of their own, and soon, the laughter of two small children filled the house once more, this time not out of need, but joy. Aaron never forgot where he came from. He returned to the village often. On one trip, he stood before the old, crumbling house where he had grown up and let the memories rise, not just of pain, but of perseverance. He walked through the familiar paths, met old neighbors, and sat beneath the tree where he used to read by candlelight. Then he did something he had always dreamed of doing. He launched a foundation. The Alina Foundation, named after his mother, focused on providing educational resources, food, and healthcare to children in rural areas. It began with a small donation, then grew. Claire helped design the programs. Caleb offered free health screenings. Mia hosted reading circles and teacher training sessions. They built a community center in the village with classrooms, a library, and a small clinic. They started scholarships for girls and outreach programs for young boys who had been forced to drop out of school. Aaron made sure that every child knew someone believed in them. Success didn't change him, it refined him. It gave him more tools, more voice, more reach. But inside, he remained the boy who whispered English words into the dark, the brother who skipped meals so his siblings wouldn't have to, the son who promised his mother he would never give up. The story of Aaron's life became a quiet anthem in every corner he touched. Not because he shouted it, but because he lived it honestly, humbly, relentlessly. Years passed. Caleb opened his own clinic back in the village, one that offered care regardless of ability to pay. Mia became a headmistress at a school that partnered with the Alina Foundation, where she trained teachers and mentored students. One evening, at a celebration honoring the foundation's impact, Mia approached Aaron with a box. "We've been saving this," she said with a grin. Inside were hundreds of handwritten notes, letters from children whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Some thanked him for books, others for medicine. Some simply wrote, "Because of you, I believe in myself." Aaron read each one, slowly, with reverence. Tears fell quietly, not of sadness, but of something deeper, something like peace. That night, sitting by the window with Claire and watching their children sleep, Aaron whispered, "I kept the promise, Mama." And somewhere in the quiet echo of the stars, perhaps she smiled. Because a promise made in grief had become a legacy of light. And Aaron, born in the margins, had redrawn the map for himself, for his family, and for a future he once couldn't see.